some of them did say that they got like a 15-second warning that there was a very high potential of a major earthquake going to hit Caracas, imminently. And some people took cover on the basis of that. So the technology is improving, but basically the recourse one takes is pretty basic, and that is protect yourself from what looks solid.
Now, this is the moment that one of two large quakes hit Venezuela's capital city of Caracas. Well, the first of the earthquakes was at a magnitude of 7.2. The next, just moments later, was at 7.5. The interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, has said that at least 188 people are dead. More than 37,000 people have been reported missing. US Geological Survey experts have warned that the death toll will rise. It could exceed 10,000. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been explaining what the US is doing to help the situation.
We're already deploying search and rescue teams from Fairfax County, Virginia, and Los Angeles. There'll be some others we'll add. That's their most immediate need right now, is search and rescue efforts. They have a much of collapsed buildings, and so they'll need a lot of help in terms of digging through that. The airport there is badly damaged, so we'll have to rely on the Department of War to deploy assets there. And then we're also helping them with some overhead imagery, especially in coastal areas where they don't have full visibility over what the damage has been and what the impact has been. Those are the acute, short-term needs over the next 48 to 72 hours, because in search and rescue, you're trying to get to people while you can still save their lives. They're buried under rubble.
Well, let's speak to Stephen Gibbs, the Times Latin America correspondent, who's in Venezuela at the moment. Stephen, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Are you in Caracas at the moment, Stephen? Just tell us what it's been like on the ground.
Yes, I'm certainly in Caracas, and I was here at 6 p.m. local time yesterday. I've experienced a few earthquakes in my life, but this was absolutely off the scale, much, much worse. As you say, it was two earthquakes, but for those that experienced it, it felt like one, just one after another, really. The building I was in, fortunately, didn't collapse, but there was quite serious sort of cosmetic damage to it. And around here, lots of buildings have completely collapsed. There's this unusual thing you get in earthquakes that, you have one building that seems almost intact, and next to it, a 10-story building that's completely reduced to rubble.
It is the most powerful set of quakes to strike the country since 1900. What does one do in that situation when you first understand, I suppose, that you're experiencing an earthquake? Because it must take a little while to maybe recognise that, a good few seconds perhaps to recognise that. What do you do, Stephen, in that situation? Do you have advice that you have to follow?
Yeah, I mean, there is sort of standard procedure, and that is take cover in wherever you are. Sort of in the underneath a door well is quite a good place, under something that won't collapse, hopefully, on top of you. There is a theory you should just sort of leave the building as quickly as possible, but actually I can say why some experts say don't do that, because, for example, in my building there was a whole lot of masonry all around it, which those that ran out, actually fortunately no one was injured, but it very nearly did injure them. There was also another twist of the sort of modern world of earthquake detection and prevention or alertness, and that is those who had Android phones and sort of Google alerts. Some of them did say that they got like a 15-second warning that there was a very high potential of a major earthquake going to hit Caracas, imminently. And some people took cover on the basis of that. So the technology is improving, but basically the recourse one takes is pretty basic, and that is protect yourself from what looks solid.
Yeah, I know that there have been reports of people having slept on the streets overnight after those quakes because they either had to or thought it was a good idea to leave their buildings, and they felt that they'd be safer outside. You've, of course, been out and about today. Just take us through what you've been seeing. I know the Red Cross have been speaking to Sky News in the last few moments and have said that they're actually shocked at the scale of the devastation here.
Yeah, I mean, talking to you just from Caracas, it is pretty shocking, particularly if you live here. For example, the bank I use, which is 300 meters from where I live, is completely destroyed. There's nothing there. Fortunately, it was a bank holiday yesterday, so there was no one, we understand, inside at the time. But it is this mix of buildings intact and buildings completely destroyed. But even worse than Caracas is the area around the international airport on the coast. That is an area where a whole lot of sort of middle-class Venezuelans over the last 25 years would build or buy apartment blocks, and at least 100 of the buildings there have collapsed, and we really don't know how many people were inside them. There was also a hotel, quite a well-known hotel, which people on a budget would stay if they were traveling early to the airport. 105 rooms completely destroyed. There is reports going around that the people inside, there were lots of the family members of baseball players, because there was going to be a baseball match in the area and they'd come from across Venezuela to watch it. So all these sort of terrible stories unfolding, and it will unfortunately be a few days before we really sort of understand the scale of all this.
Yeah, I understand that the president of the National Assembly there has said 250 buildings damaged or lost, and I can see that on a bank holiday, those people staying in their holiday apartments would be particularly at risk after so many have come down. So that there is a large amount of people missing. We know that 188 are confirmed dead, but it is a rescue operation still. But inevitably, as has been indicated there by experts, the death toll will sadly go up, and quite a lot.
Oh, unfortunately, yes. I mean, there is a rescue operation, but it's pretty amateurish, I'm afraid, at the moment, because this is a country that has been through, 15 years of one of the deepest recessions ever recorded anywhere in the world. So facilities like the rescue people here are massively underfunded. I actually saw an attempt at a rescue, a whole lot of brave Venezuelans trying to save the people under the rubble. One of the rescue workers was asking if he could borrow someone's mobile phone that had a torch on it. These are people trying to do these sort of things without the equipment they need. And that is why you need this massive and very urgent international help. This is not something you can wait 3 days to do, because there are people under that rubble who will be dead in 3 days. So as soon as the international experts, and there are a whole lot in this region, this is a sort of earthquake prevalent zone, as soon as they arrive, the better.
Yeah, and look, I wonder whether there is full faith in the US administration to be able to do what they need to do. We've heard the pledge there from the Secretary of State. Is there faith there, Stephen?
Well, this country has an unusual relationship with the United States, which obviously took away President Maduro on January the 3rd, which was not necessarily an unpopular move amongst many Venezuelans, but it is an awkward and difficult relationship. And maybe this will be a test, whether the United States can just, without any kind of qualifications, just come in and help. One thing I will say, we're hearing these sort of appalling possibilities of a death toll in the tens of thousands. Who knows really, but one reason for it to be hopeful that it will be less than that is another consequence of what's been going on in Venezuela for the last decade or so, and that is enormous migration. 25% of the entire country, 8 million people have left, which means in many of these apartment buildings, including, for example, the one I'm speaking to you from, probably it's only got like 20% occupation. So that there's a hope that the figures might, or the worst sort of scale possible figures, will be scaled back, taking that into account. But it is a very serious issue, of course.
Look, Stephen, all the best from us. Thank you so much for being able to speak to us. Stephen Gibbs there, who is the Times Latin America correspondent. He's in Venezuela, in Caracas, and there's some really important reporting going on there. Thank you, Stephen. Let's connect now to Kieran Donnelly. He's Vice President for Crisis Response and Recovery, based in New York, but with an operation going on in Venezuela at the moment. What are you hearing, Kieran, about the situation there?
So the International Rescue Committee has a team in Venezuela. We've been working there for over 5 years. We have a team of local staff, but also we work very closely with local civil society organizations. What we're hearing from our team and our partners tracks very much with what your correspondent was describing in terms of the very fearful, panic-stricken atmosphere yesterday as the earthquake struck. people having to evacuate, spending the night sleeping in the streets for fear of further aftershocks. Our teams then gathered this morning, came to the office and started planning their response. But really, it's very hard to get accurate information in these kinds of situations because of the impact on communications infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and so on. There is widespread destruction. We won't know the full extent of that for some weeks. But what we do know is that the numbers of people who've been killed and injured, those who've lost their homes and are in need of assistance, are inevitably going to grow as we get more information. And that there will be not just needs in terms of the search and rescue and ultimately recovery efforts, but also very much in terms of meeting the immediate needs of people who've lost their homes, healthcare, shelter, water, where sanitation systems have been broken down. There's a risk of disease outbreaks. And of course, all of this in a country which has been suffering a humanitarian crisis in which a third of the population, 8 million people in the country, are in need of assistance. And as your correspondent noted, another 8 million people have left the country over recent years.
Yeah, and for you, your operations must be hampered. It must be frustrating for you that because of the economic situation over there, operations such as yours and what should be going on at a local level, much of that is hampered by economic constraint. It should be an easier, perhaps, simpler and more decisive operation. But our correspondent there calling it pretty amateurish because of the constraints.
Yeah, I would say the term amateurish perhaps doesn't do full justice to the courage and
of course,
efforts of local communities. We're seeing reports of building residents literally pulling their neighbours out from the rubble and serving them, doing the best they can.
But they're putting themselves in danger, aren't they, effectively, because there's a lack of sophisticated equipment there.
Exactly. And as we try to go to scale in meeting the needs of people, the supply chain constraints, in any earthquake, it's always a challenge because, as I said, transport infrastructure, other things have been damaged. But in Venezuela, simply being able to purchase the levels of supplies that we need at the scale we need them isn't straightforward, and bringing new supplies into the country isn't going to be straightforward. The government obviously has called for international assistance, and we'll do all we can to support their efforts and civil society efforts. But it's going to take partnership from international partners, from the US, regional partners, not just in sending search and recovery teams, but also in providing funding and facilitating with some of those supply chain challenges, getting food to people, getting healthcare up and running. But the baseline, even before the earthquake, as I said, is really quite challenging in terms of the humanitarian needs in the country.
Look, thank you for speaking to us. We do appreciate it. Kieran Donnelly, who's Vice President for Crisis Response and Recovery, who have an operation on the ground in Venezuela at the moment. Thanks for being with us.